Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea Podcast. Now episodes, we talk about new music and music news.
Yes, indeed. And we're delighted to be back. It's been a couple of weeks now since we've done one of these recaps of the latest goings on in the world of music. And I feel like we have to start, given who we are and given one of the biggest projects that we've undertaken on this channel, I have to talk about the fact that just 4 months after the release of their last album, First Two Pages of Frankenstein, which we reviewed in excruciating detail back when it was released, we have new music from The National yet again. 2 new songs, Alphabet City and Space Invader, that the band, officially, it's just here are 2 new songs, but if you read between the lines, the band have been playing a lot more than just these 2 new songs live. Matt has said that they've been in the recording studio, and most excitingly, there was a leak. So this is from me going deep on the National subreddit and beyond. Apparently, someone found a music journalist's last FM account, and that music journalist had been listening to a new album from The National, and from that, you know, all the track information was discovered. The fact that it's got a Phoebe Bridgers feature and a Roseanne Cash feature as well. That's Johnny Cash's eldest daughter, for anyone out of the know, which should be interesting. And yeah, and so that apparently the new album is going to be released maybe next month, maybe later than that, but apparently this year anyway. And it's supposedly going to be called Laugh Track. And we have these 2 songs which are on the track list, the leaked track list anyway, and they are, well, they're fucking great, I think.
They're fucking phenomenal.
Well,
like, holy shit.
They're both audibly post First Two Pages of Frankenstein, like especially in Matt's writing style, which is kind of a continuation of the sort of tumbling over, almost incoherent, but, you know, drunkenly lyrical style that he had on that album. But musically, the songs, they feel a bit less sterile than the music on that album felt. Even a song like Alphabet City, which is the more low-key and reserved of the 2, certainly the one that would maybe fit in most comfortably on that previous album, has a little bit more life to it, has a little bit more color to it, and a little bit more warmth to it, as well as some more interesting compositional stuff going on that I think would have made it automatically a standout on that album. To say nothing of Space Invader, which is a 7-minute epic that starts out as this, you know, Trouble Will Find Me-esque ballad. Like, for the first half of the song, I was like, am I listening to like a demo of Slipped or something? Or am I listening to something like that was supposed to be on that album? And then partway through transforms into this it's like a fusion of So Far So Fast and like the live version of Squalor Victoria, where it's just this like booming anthemic
explosions in the sky-esque
rock instrumental thing that's going on, with, of course, you know, Brian Devendorf adding all the muscle you would hope for. I mean, what do you 2 make of these tracks, and how do you feel about them coming off of how collectively underwhelmed we all were by that last album?
I'll say that Alphabet City has yet to fully click with me. That said, I still probably like it more than anything off of Frankenstein. But Space Invader, like, you know, halfway through that song, I turned into that Hugh Jackman gif from The Fountain. I mean,
yeah,
fuck. Like, oh,
yeah,
we're so back.
Again, I think that, you know, I was really enjoying the first half of that song. I think that, you know, it's agreeable to me in the same way that those deep cuts on Trouble Will Find Me and songs like Heaven Faced and Humiliation are. But then just the way it becomes, the way it settles into that, it's actually, it takes a whole minute to kind of transition away from that part of the song into this sort of post-rock finale, I guess. But just what really got me about it was how fully they committed to it. And it was just like, it kept ramping up. And what was really, I think what's particularly satisfying about this, and this is something I've seen a lot of National fans say, is like, if you've ever seen them live, or even if you've just seen a recording of them playing live, like, they do this kind of thing a lot when they play.
Yeah, like they'll turn like About Today into a song like this.
Yeah, exactly. And so
Walk It Back.
And even when they played songs that ended up on first two pages of Frankenstein before the album was released, they had a lot more muscle, and they had in some cases, comparable, developments in the way that they sounded. I remember. The thing is that's always frustrated National fans is that this kind of energy never seems to make it onto the studio album. I remember this for me as a fan as far back as Sleep Well Beast, a record which I've come to completely adore basically every second of. When that released, I felt a certain way about certain songs, maybe not jumping out and feeling as electric as the live recordings that I had been inhaling. So to actually get a song that fully just leans into what they can do in that format and just perfectly translates it, it's satisfying and unexpected as well. Satisfying and unexpected as well. I think I remember we were trying to be optimistic when we reviewed Frankenstein about just how little that record really connected with us, but I could sense that we were also kind of bracing ourselves to be let down.
Maybe it'll grow on me.
Yeah. And then just for this to happen like the same year, just a few months later, it feels like, I'm sure they're very proud of that last record, but it feels almost like a purposeful response. Like, yeah, we admit we were really low key on that album. We really kind of like pared things back and it wasn't for everyone. So we're gonna compensate for that now. So yeah, really, really exciting. And
I mean, there was speculation that there was a second album, I believe, that they had been working on, or just like a bunch of extra stuff, basically, that the band hadn't released at the time of first two pages of Frankenstein. And we were kind of wary about that speculation because we were like, very like, when's Kendrick gonna drop Nation kind of type beat whenever a disappointing album comes out.
The thing that lots of artists say, which is that, oh yeah, we recorded like 20 songs for this album.
Yeah,
say that all the time, and it's like.
It's like, all right, Carly Rae Jepsen, pony up, fucking
exactly. All right,
put your money where your mouth is. The thing that I think surprised me the most about this is not only just how like invigorated it felt. It actually felt a lot like the Smile single that came out a couple of months ago, where it has a similar, like, the first half of the song is, the band doing what the band do really, really well. And then the second half is them just going like as big as humanly possible. And it just sounds fantastic. And it just feels really adventurous for all these very storied musicians. But not only that, but like, Alphabet City didn't click with me at first, but I listened to it a little bit more and kind of got progressively more into it just because Riley's right. Like, the writing is very in keeping with the same thematic stuff that was on Frankenstein. But like, something that Morgan and I kind of pointed out in that review is that like we understood the core of that record and what it was talking about, but it was also kind of like not really innately that compelling. Whereas here, like, it's like a switch was flipped or something, and it's just like when he's talking about all of these issues and problems and these themes about being stuck, it just feels like way more like I'm just able to get on its wavelength. And maybe that's a combination from the more immediate sound, but like, I don't know, it feels good to just be immediately rewarded. And like, maybe again, this is us just doing wishful thinking, but maybe this will allow to a bit of an improved opinion of Frankenstein in the context of another record. If it's like a duology, maybe the fact that that's the more sedate complement to a livelier record, it could end up being a little bit more, approachable or understandable in retrospect.
Worst case scenario for me, I get to like making my own album out of the two, which I've done before when bands sort of thing. I want to move on now and pay a quick tribute to one of the most important figures in the development of the lo-fi scene and American alternative rock and indie rock in the 1990s, the drummer Gary Young, who was the first drummer for probably the most important precedent to indie rock band of the 90s, Pavement. He was their drummer in their early EPs and on their incredible debut album, Slanted and Enchanted, which is one of the albums of my life. So going back to listen to that in full this week, it's like going back to listen to anything that you just completely wore into the ground when you were 15, 16 years old. It just brings up a well of emotions. And but rather than making it about me, I'll just say that, Gary Young's really kinetic and often like extra style really adds an element to that record that makes it unique among Pavement's catalog, especially because as they would go on, their records would get more, I suppose, refined and tasteful, which is a weird thing to say about any Pavement album, but certainly compared to Slanted and Enchanted, which is such a kind of unhinged and all over the place record, so scrappy, so messy, but so endearing. And a huge part of that is Gary Young. I mean, there's just the ridiculously unnecessary snare rolls that he's doing on In the Mouth of Desert, the kinetic energy that he brings to Summer Babe, you know, the marching band fills that he adds to a song like Fame Thrower, and just the just hammering he's doing on a song like Two States. Just all rounder, that's a great album. One of my favorite alt rock albums of the 90s, and he's a huge part of it. So rest in peace, you know. And it's his contributions and his place in the band really interesting as well, because he was like significantly older than every other member of the band, and he was kind of like a hired hand who was kind of came in with a little bit more experience than anyone in Pavement actually had, you know, when they were starting out as 20 somethings, you know, basically kids, and he was older. And he kind of, I guess, helped to ground them early on. And I imagine they took a lot of lessons away from working with him. So, and there were, of course, you know, great tributes from Scott Camberg and Bob Nastakinavich. I can never say his surname. And of course, Stephen Malkmus this week as well. So yeah, big shout out. Moving on, I want to talk about another artist who we have a considerable amount of hype around at the moment, who is of a pretty high profile as well. One Miss Olivia Rodrigo, whose upcoming album Guts is shaping up to be one of the most anticipated major releases of the year for us, and certainly for me and Jake as well. And off the back of the two singles that she's released so far, you had the more kind of melodramatic balladry of Vampire, which I really enjoyed, and then you have this kind of, you know, really snotty, bratty mall punk thing with Bad Idea, right, which has kind of taken over the internet a little bit in the last couple of weeks. I mean, what do you think of these singles? Are you excited for Miss Rodrigo's sophomore effort?
I am. I really enjoyed Sour for what it was, you know, a nice little piece of sort of 2000s retro revival, a kind of, you know, Paramore worship that's very focused on the teenage girl experience and what have you. Now I want to see her maturation record. I see her I want her to get a little weird with it. And then when Vampire released, I was like, okay, I can work with this, because this is weird. Like, it's a very kind of structurally amorphous song that still kind of innately remains compelling, just because it's got a lot of good core lyrical moments, and Olivia's a very good performer. But I was still kind of like, I don't know overall what this is going to be like just from this single alone. So then we get Bad Idea, right? And I'm like, okay, I can see where we're going here. And this is like a quintessential sort of like follow-up album single, in that it's like, it's really kind of boisterous and kinetic and very like, it's just got all these like tiny little moments that feel like they're like micro hooks that are just kind of stuck throughout it. And it's just got this kind of like,
fuck it, it's fine.
Exactly. It's this like very try hard, you know, like I kind of want to say it's a little bit lame, but that's also like, she leans so hard into it with like such commitment that it's like, that's the bit, that becomes the appeal, that it's a little bit kind of like cringy, but it's done with like such a fire that you're like, you know, yeah, this feels like being an awkward 19-year-old.
Well, it's bratty and it's angsty and it's in your face and it's tongue-in-cheek and it's really funny.
It's like it's the brutal of this album, which was my favorite song on Sour.
A great comp as well, you know, and it has that same sort of huge energy that a song like Good For You has as well, which I think is probably you know, deservingly one of her biggest songs. What I like about Olivia Rodrigo just as a figure in the pop firmament right now is how outwardly angsty and you know, unafraid to be cringe that she is, you know, in an era where so much of, you know, mainstream pop is sculpted by, you know, AR teams and, you know, managers and all that kind of stuff to be as, you know, uncontroversial and as approachable as possible. And she's just, you know, I'm not pretending that she's all that transgressive in any way. She just has a lot of
Yeah.
personality, and she doesn't capitulate on that. In fact, she makes it kind of the center of the music. And I like that the whole aesthetic of this upcoming record is kind of leaning into the sort of like, you know, these metaphors of violence and darkness for teenage drama. Basically, you know, it's all got a very American Horror Story aesthetic, you know, with songs like song titles like All American Bitch, Ballad of a Homeschooled Girl, The Grudge, which I'm assuming is not a Tool cover, but you know, we won't know until we know. Pretty isn't pretty. Oh, yeah.
So true.
You're correct, and it's also it's like it does kind of have that like sort of angsty American Horror Story aesthetic, except I have way more faith that Olivia and her team of people know what they're making way more than the Ryan Murphy and co of American Horror Story. They nail their kind of aesthetics, but like it's everything beneath it that sucks. Whereas Olivia, I feel like, is a bit more honest. Sour is an album that I found endearing because it had no illusions about itself.
You know, it's really interesting. I feel like Billie Eilish set a precedent of these artists can make music that is just entirely created within this insular world of the artist's own bedroom, and that can be, you know, it doesn't need to pass all of these checks. It doesn't need to kind of, you know, go through the levels. It doesn't need to have a big Max Martin on it. It doesn't need to have a huge name on it behind the boards in order to kind of reach that potential, you know, in terms of commercial success. So Billie Eilish, I feel like, set that precedent. And I don't know how independently Olivia Rodrigo works, but I feel like now that precedent has been set, you're getting a lot of artists who are at the very least trying to present the versions of themselves that come through in their songs in the same kind of way. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm very intrigued to hear what happens with the song Teenage Dream, which is the closer to the album, whether it's an actual, like I said to Cole the other day, I think I said that I hope that what it is like what Tori Amos did to Smells Like Teen Spirit. Like it's a very faithful cover, except you strip all of the music away and you just hold a microphone and you just say it like you're about to die.
It's noticeably like it's not afraid to be a little ugly, or just like a little sort of hard to look at or listen to.
It's kind of the same pattern of how she rolled out Sour, because Vampire's the driver's license and Bad Idea Right is the Deja Vu. Those were the first two singles of that album. And I remember, you know, everyone was kind of saying all this shit about Olivia Rodrigo and how kind of, you know, shamelessly melodramatically sappy and lame she was for Driver's License, when that song, you know, the energy of that song and the kind of camp and the just kind of, you know, wretched teenage melodrama of that song made a lot more sense once you had a fuller picture of her artistic personality.
I don't understand this anti-melodrama idea in terms of pop music. Like I am not interested in an Elton John that is not melodramatic or full of flair and personality.
It's just always been misogyny though, because it never comes up with male artists, and it always does with female artists.
I mean, just biggest male pop star in the world is The Fucking Weeknd. Like,
I want to acknowledge that an album that was pretty big for me as a teenager, and I know was also an album that you two bonded over as well when you became friends, that being the first album from CHVRCHES, or just the early music from CHVRCHES in general, but their first album, The Bones of What You Believe, is turning 10 soon. It felt like a good opportunity to revisit their music this week, which is some of the best synth pop of the last 10 years. What's interesting about CHVRCHES is how they've done such a really good job of remaining a kind of really institutionally popular and reliable synth pop band, despite the fact that they haven't really changed their sound or really adapted or evolved in any meaningful way at all. Really, they've just remained really, really consistent, and they've known how to manipulate their aesthetic more or less successfully. I mean, you know, you can debate on the artistic merit of a record like Love Is Dead, which I think was like a really interesting aesthetic pivot that just mostly failed to bring the songs that needed to really pull it off. But then we had Screen Violence in 2021, which is, anyone who's been watching us, who was watching us at that time, may well remember that was one of the most glowing reviews that we gave to a pop inclined album that year. Even though there were moments and little things about that album I know that we debated and disagreed on, it was generally just like, CHVRCHES have brought the heat, really killer concept, no pun intended, and just an album that has held up really well.
I listen to a song from that album like every day still. I still think that's their best record, and it's one of my favorite pop albums of the decade so far still.
I have a bit of a weird relationship with CHVRCHES in a certain sense, in that I think Bones is probably their best album. I've listened to every Open Eye more, and that's kind of the one that I was most obsessed with. And then Screened Violence, I think, is like their most impressive achievement. There's like these three different distinct ways of praising something as great. But yeah, let's just talk about Bones for a sec. Killer album. I mean, I still remember hearing the Mother We Share for the first time, Gun for the first time, fucking Recover for the first time, which came out before the album because it was on the Recover EP. I remember Lies. EP. I mean, that album just brings so much heat.
I don't think it is possible for them to write a song I like more than Gun, and that's not even like a shortcoming of theirs. God, I listen to this song, and I mean this album in general, so much, like so much, that it's just like that, and that song in particular, and the video for it is like written into the wiring of my brain, and it's just like it's a song that I put on, and I'm like who I was 8 to 10 years ago, which is frightening, actually, now that I think about it, and then I put it that way.
Dude, I had the same fucking experience re-listening to that this week. I was just like, I haven't listened to some of these songs in a while, but I was just like, I suddenly remembered Googling the album art for the Recovery EP to set it up in my iTunes library because I just ripped the songs from YouTube. Hell, I think that music video may be the first music video you ever sent me, like in a text message. It'd be like, hey, watch this. This song is fucking killer. And I did. And I was like, oh, holy shit. And then your relationship with this album became my relationship with this album, because I mean, like, again, Mother We Share, fucking Gun, Lies, Science and Visions is also one of my favorite songs on there, particularly kind of underrated in my opinion.
CHVRCHES album has a kind of deep cut where they go for like, they do like a 5-minute song, and it's like really sort of atmospheric and ethereal and pulp and sort of pulsy, and it always ends up being one of the best songs in the album, and Science and Visions is that. Collectively, I cannot tell you how much time I've spent throwing ass to Lies in my life. Like, that's
so good.
That shit just fuck, man. And of course, the thing that made, the thing that elevates CHVRCHES as well is that they're, Lauren Mayberry is an incredibly charismatic and compelling singer who brings a lot of emotion to these songs as well. I mean, I think the reason why The Mother We Share was kind of the big song for them, in 2013, was just that song has this really kind of, moving, compelling, emotional core at the heart of it. But yeah, a stellar album, front to back. It's one of those records where, yeah, you remember the 2 or 3 big songs that you really spun the most, but then you go back and put it on, and the deep cuts are just way better than you remember them being as well. Songs like Tether and Lungs, and the underrated Closer as well. Great fucking record, man. Really great fucking record. I want to shout out an EP or an artist that I would never have really come across of my own volition if it weren't for a mutual of mine that brought them to my attention. And that is the K-pop band NewJeans, who released a EP or released a kind of, it's weird with the way that K-pop artists release music. It's very different to the way that Western pop artists release music. But this group NewJeans released this EP called Get Up, this collection of songs, and it was recommended to me, and I was like, okay, I'll give this a fair shot. I know that Jake's been listening to some K-pop semi recently as well that Jake really enjoys. So I was like, okay, I want to kind of ease myself into this world as well. And immediately I was struck by things that I wasn't expecting, which is how much UK garage and dubstep influence, like specifically like that late 2000s, very British garage sound that's incorporated here into this kind of K-pop aesthetic, which fits it really fucking well. And then I did some research and I found out that 4 of the songs on the EP were actually produced by the Portuguese singer-songwriter and producer Erica de Cassier, or Erica de Cassier. I'm not actually sure how to say her name, but she's an artist that I've been really, really into for a while. She had an album in 2019 called Essentials, and she and like Jesse Lanza are like both really great sort of semi-underground artists doing like alternative contemporary R&B down-tempo music in this production style, like really low-key pop music. And Erica in particular has, I feel like, gone pretty under the radar for how talented that she is. And so to find out that she was involved in producing these songs made a lot of things make sense to me. But yeah, these are, it's a really enjoyable EP. It's got a lot of character. It's got a lot of flair to it. That particular, garage dub sound that the EP has makes it stand out and shows that NewJeans are obviously really, really interested in pushing the boundaries of what K-pop can sound like.
Similarly, had a very good time with it. I mean, like, this is a 12-minute long EP, and these songs are just like, vacuum sealed, airtight examples of this sort of formula that they've got nailed down pat. And I'm just really impressed with how well that kind of garage, but also like drum and bass almost style percussion that a lot of these songs utilize is just like, it fits this like a glove, and it adds a lot of really great momentum to these songs. I'm particularly impressed with the second song on here, Super Shy. That's like one of the best pop songs I've heard all year, honestly. Like, an absolutely insatiable hook. But I also think what kind of distinguishes this from a lot of other K-pop that I've heard is that it's a lot less maximal than that is. So like, if you're trying to get somebody into this world of music, this is like, it's really digestible, it's really well designed, and it's not too much. Like, it's a lot more like palatable, I guess, if you're not looking for that explicitly anyway.
It's not too overly sugary, which is a funny thing to say, given that the EP has, for some reason that I still have not been able to determine, the Powerpuff Girls on the cover art. I guess there are 5 of them in the band. They're actually a pretty new group. Like, they have not been around very long at all. This is only their second release.
Yeah.
Formed last year, and they've kind of come up. They've obviously got a really good PR team around them, but they have kind of come from nowhere as well. So they're one to keep an eye on as well. And maybe if you're looking for a bit of a gateway into K-pop as well, you might find this particularly enjoyable. For the rest of the episode, we're going to talk about some albums that have come out recently that we're really into, or that we feel are noteworthy, that we don't want to kind of dedicate a full video to. So first up, Jake, why don't you tell us a little bit about this band, Hail the Sun, and the sound of Swancore, and what it is about this band, their new album, that you've really taken to? Because I've listened to this as well, but I only listened to it because you were really, really into it. So tell me about it.
Hail the Sun are an interesting band. They're kind of as Riley said, technically a rate your music term, Swancore, but I mean like a bit more I think accurately labeled post-hardcore, elements of math rock as well. California band, and they have been making music for a pretty decent while now, since 2010. But I came across them because they were a band that the YouTube channel Critical Reactions is a very big fan of. I think that maybe one of their albums was like an album of the year of his or something. But I was just interested in it because he did one of their songs, and it was very Thursday, Coheed and Cambria, at the drive-in adjacent. I mean, it's just like our shit supremely. So I've been meaning to get to albums of theirs like Wake for a while now, but I've only heard a couple of songs from it, and I liked what I heard. But I saw that they had a new album out, and what we have here is an incredibly tight, excellently performed, and fantastically written album. This is an album that, like, I think the barrier for entry here, more than anything, is probably going to be those vocals. I mean, like, if you are used to this style, then it's not that much of a hurdle at all. But like,
I
again,
just
very
threw
much
on the first song for the first time, and I was like, oh, I'm at home.
Yeah. And
what
it's my realm
by those vocals is that kind of high register, incredibly clean and very sort of like slick, almost synthetically produced sound. I don't listen to a lot of Swancore, which is, to be clear, this is this genre name that specifically refers to like mathy, proggy, metalcore adjacent rock with that vocal style. In fact, it's not very often that you get a genre name that specifically refers to the vocal style. But yeah, that particular type of like Coheed and Cambria style shit, you know, bands like Dance Gavin Dance and what's the other one? The Fall of Troy and Thank You Scientist and stuff.
Yeah.
It's not for everyone. A lot of people dislike this kind of music because they like a little bit more grit in this sort of thing. But if you're not someone who has that particular restriction in your taste palette, if you like to hear really clean, really blazing bright sounds from this style, then How the Sun have got you.
Just quick question,
Morgan.
Why are people retroactively naming my shit? Stop it. He's like, oh, this is called this. I'm like, no, it's not. Do not quote the text to me. I was there
when it was written. And I think one of my favorite things about this album, something that stuck with me so strongly, is just how great the writing is. There are lots of songs on here, particularly songs like 60-minute session blocks, which is probably my favorite song on there. Maladapted and Tithe, 3 absolutely phenomenal fucking songs that are all very emotional. This is a record that expels a lot of internal venom and strife and feels very like nakedly bare. If the cleanness of the production doesn't quite get it over the line for you, the very, very messy bitch lyrics probably will. And as a result, I very much enjoyed my time with this. It's a very holistic record, very well-rounded. Yeah, Morgan, absolutely U-core to the biggest degree. Fuck Swancore. It's Morgan core. God damn it.
It's what everyone should start calling it.
Yes, everyone.
That's people are saying this.
On a similar note, I want to talk about this new release, and I know this is one that 3 of us have heard. From this artist called Johnny Booth, which I did not initially realize was the band, not a person.
Abigail Williams core.
Well, just, yeah. I feel like it's a very... I don't know why I think this, but it feels very metalcore to just name your band a person. That it just feels very like stupid in a way that fits with that whole scene. And I say that with endearment. Because this album
is
also hard as hell. In fact, putting this on last night, okay, and I'll preface this by saying there's a lot of diversity in the sounds on this record, but putting this on last night, I think 2040, the opening, it might be the loudest song I've heard all year. It's like Andrew WK, like party till you puke levels of like, let's keep doing this, and then just kind of add more layers of it and more layers of it and just make it louder as artificially as possible. It's really like, the only word I can think of is shitty, but it's shitty in a good way.
It's a layer. They are clipping the mic on purpose.
But you know, it's also like full of flavor and color and interesting digressions throughout the album as well. I mean, a song like Full Tilt is barely heavy at all, but you have big moments that stand out as well. Like my favorite song on the album, Why Becomes How, which just slams and has hooks. I mean, I this is not my forte really, so I should cede the floor, but just know that whatever you say, I endorse.
Yeah, I found this album, I logged on to Sputnik Music for the first time in God knows how long.
Ooh.
And this was one of the most, I think at the time it was the #1 album of the year. I don't know if that's still true. And then I actually found the music video for Collapse in the Key of Fireworks, which isn't really like a special music video or anything. It's a really good like video of them performing the song basically. But the song itself is like, ow! Ow! But yes, it's like, it sounds heavily processed in a way that is like peeling the flesh off of your bones. I mean, I don't know if we said this, but this is a metalcore album, melodic hardcore, but it is a very distinct flavor of that, I don't think you're mistaking anything on here for your Converges or your, I don't know, your Knocked Looses. It's interesting in the ways that it differentiates itself from acts like those. The band I see them get compared to a lot is Loathe, which I think tracks in terms of like the really, really heavy stuff on their output, both in how they sort of weaponize the sort of really slickly produced nature of a lot of modern metalcore, which usually is sort of a turnoff for me. But it seems like for this band, and honestly, I don't think Loathe are as good at it as Johnny Booth are. They just sort of diversify themselves in ways that are more, that sort of carry the weight there, but and just sort of making something that sounds really fucked up through the lens of like all of the extremely slickly produced like Tesseract and Periphery type of extreme metal.
It reminds me a little bit of like, I think, just trying to think of reference points that more people might be familiar with. I thought a little bit of like the Armed, like their older stuff, which was more kind of like straight into this, just like, let's be really, really fucking loud and really, really fucking clean, and so tongue-in-cheek about it that we're almost kind of daring people to be purists or whatever, to be pissed off by it. It's quite interesting because I've been listening to the Armed a lot lately, but their new singles, which are like kind of less heavy than their older material, and they're kind of heading in more of an art rock direction. But that all said, Johnny Booth have kind of arrived in and sort of filled this slot so beautifully, because the record is ridiculously heavy, it's ridiculously excessive, it's so in your face, but it is so much fun as well, and it delights in all of the little twists and turns that it takes. You can feel how exciting and how much energy and how much passion everyone involved has for every little twist and turn that this album takes, and there's a lot of them, and there's enough, I suppose, freshness and creativity in the different ways they find to kind of reach that really heavy, really in your face, really crushing moment that so much of this music kind of hinges around. They find really unique ways to kind of approach that, that make it feel like you're not just getting the same, inevitable 70 layers of guitars crushing weight thing. Like, you get that, but you always arrive at it from a different angle, which is what a record like this should be trying to do, is make it feel continually fresh as you go along, and not as though you just get the whole thing from the first couple of songs. So that's the biggest success of it, I think, is how just continually exciting it stays. Jake, anything else that you've been listening to lately, albums wise, that you want to shout out?
One thing I have to shout out, because point blank, nobody is fucking talking about this album, and I guarantee you, if you listen to it, one song from it, any song, you will wonder why. Because not only is this an album from a very small artist, this is an album that sounds huge and expensive and unignorable. And that is an album from the artist Lauren Auder. And if you are a longtime listener of the show, you'll actually know that I recommended her EP at the very beginning of last year as a very recent release. I think it was from 2021, actually. The EP, 5 Songs for the Dysphoric. I was really taken with that EP then. And honestly, that's probably one of my favorite EPs of all time. That's 5 virtually perfect, ornate Baroque pop songs that are, heavily transgender. It's also like, no matter what genres I ascribe to these releases, you need to know that this still doesn't sound like anything you know of when you think of those genres. This is so very singular. And a lot of that does have to do with Lauren herself as a performer. She has an incredibly sort of deep baritone singing voice. It's like if Nick Cave was also Fiona Apple. It's really difficult to put into words. A very similar kind of presence, and also in the world of queer music. If you really liked the Anohini album from this year that we talked about a couple of weeks ago and raved about, this is also so 100% your shit, you have no idea. But Lauren's debut record came out very, very recently, and I've kind of had this in my back pocket for a little while, just because 5 Songs for the Dysphoric is a very arduous listen. Again, particularly if you are well acquainted with the subjects and topics at hand, it can be triggering, to put it mildly. And this debut album here is called The Infinite Spine. It came out sort of like at the very end of July. And to put it bluntly, the last time I felt an emotional reaction this strong from an album, it was The Origin of My Depression by the artist Yuboa, which is a 10 out of 10 album for me, that I've heard twice, because I can't listen to it. It's literally impossible. I find the content of the noise and the lyricism, all of the combinations, I can't do it. Like, I love it. It's a great album. I will be listening to everything Yuboa makes, but it's impossible for me anymore. And this makes me feel very similarly. However, it's a bit more emotionally multifaceted. This is not an album I would describe as being particularly dour. It does touch on lots of dark subjects. Again, transness, dysphoria, womanhood, very specifically and very broadly. There are several songs on here that refer to like specific like female figures in the world and how like men have treated them, directly invoking Britney Spears, John Benet Ramsey. Goes to some pretty dark places, but the sound of this is incredible. Not only is it this kind of genre defying art pop, there are elements of sort of harder edged alternative rock, sort of more straightforward singer-songwriter music. Again, Fiona Apple actually is a really big point of comparison for me with all of this. Chamber pop. Basically, the production style is that this sounds like Bjork's Utopia. Everything is big, it is loud, it's, partially kind of compressed to give it that extra bit of weight, but it's never, colorless or murky or weird. But again, the main draw is Lauren as a performer who somehow makes herself shine brighter than the sun on this album that features these incredibly lush, beautiful instrumentation. Like, you would need nothing short of an S-class performer to be able to rise to the challenge of meeting kind of the energy level of the music on here. And Lauren does it in spades. Every song on here is so fully crystallized. It's a jarring listen, so almost from time to time, just because these songs exist in their own little worlds, in the same way that I get from like the ornate detail of, again, Björk's Vespertine was another album that I thought it's a lot of the ornamental detail and the transportative nature of that album can also be found in here. But it's like combined with an unmistakable voice and an incredible sense of poeticism. I mean, like, when Lauren isn't being incredibly direct and incredibly blunt, she is weaving lyrical tapestries that are, I mean, like, I'm floored simply. And like songs like City in a Bottle or Opus or We Assume Too Many Roles, I think one of the best fucking songs on here. I'm stunned. Like, there are parts of these songs that I still don't even really know how I feel about, just because the lyricism becomes so esoteric, but still really like gutting, immediate, heart-wrenching, evocative. Maybe you don't entirely know or understand why, but again, this is a must listen for the year for me. Like, anybody, like not even if you're interested in this, even if you're not interested in this, go and listen to it, just because Lauren like has kind of like failed to like really like break through like in a big way. But this is the kind of album that should put you in the spotlight, because it's one of the best albums of the year, hands down.
I want to get in my bag for a moment and talk about something that, well, it's a new release from...
Can you fit in a bag?
Big Bag.
Fuck.
It's a new release from my favorite artist of all time, and so I can't not talk about it in a public setting, even though I already have. I wrote a lengthy review of it on Rate Your Music that got front page the day we're recording this. Pretty proud of that. But new release from Autechre, new, I guess someone less charitable but not unfair could describe it as a data dump. A lot of their live releases are. What they tend to do is they tend to release multiple full soundboards of their shows at once. The idea, I think, for them is so that people who were at a particular show can get their show and re-listen to their show. But it's also just a way of, if you're a super fan like me, you got all these different sets, many of which are made up from very similar material. You get to listen to them, you get to kind of see how their process of constructing a live show evolves. It's really, really fun, fascinating, if you're into that kind of thing. It's not for everyone though, but I want to acknowledge it because I think this is probably the strongest set of live shows as a compilation that they have released so far. There's a lot of bootlegs going around from further back in time that I think are even better, but they're not officially released. So in terms of what Rob and Sean have officially decided to put out there on their store, I think this is the best value for money that you're going to get so far. I would particularly shout out, they did 2 shows on the same night in London at a venue called the Barbican, and this is kind of in Autechre lore, and I'm sounding like a fucking Grateful Dead head here, but in Autechre lore, this show or this night has kind of gone down into the annals of history for the duo, because it was like they did 2 shows in one night and both shows were like radically different, and both shows are captured on this release. And there's a lot of buzz around the second show in particular, which is really heavy on hardcore techno and even hip-hop style elements in the music as well. So I would say if anyone is curious about dipping their toes into the admittedly intimidating waters of Autechre's live material, the one I would recommend is that second London show, London B. That's a really great sort of, I guess, capturing of what they're capable of in the setting that, again, you wouldn't get on any of their records. The albums or the shows are not on streaming, like on major streaming services as yet, but you can actually stream them on the AE store without even needing to download them, or you can find them on SoulSeek, wherever you get your music, if you're curious enough to want to look into it. I do recommend it. I think that it's it's all consuming for me in the way that any release from Autechre is going to be, but especially when it's been 3 years since the last album proper. I'm hungry for something new, and so I've basically inhaled this. Last thing I want to talk about today, and probably the biggest release, or at least the most talked about release that we're talking about today, from one of the most high profile artists, at least within the music circles that we run in, and that I'm sure you at home run in as well if you're listening to this new album from Noname, Sundial. Heavily anticipated record because Noname hadn't put out an album for 5 years, and Noname developed quietly, within sort of indie abstract hip-hop circles, developed a reputation as one of the most dependable and distinct and unique and colorful and exciting voices in hip-hop throughout the 2010s, through her solo records like Telephone and Room 25, and through the various features that she's done over the years as well. Noname has very painstakingly and very carefully crafted an artistic persona for herself that's been very, very fruitful and really, really successful. I still think that Room 25 is an incredible album. Front to back, that one really, really holds up, and I think realized a lot of what was most exciting about her for me at that point in time. And so, yeah, of course, we wanted more Noname music ever since then. So now she's back with Sundial. And first of all, I think this is a very good record that is, for a number of reasons, difficult to talk about and difficult to appreciate from the perspective where I'm at. Noname would say, and basically everything about Noname's music would back up, that this isn't a record for me. This isn't really a record for any of us. Noname has, again, understandably resisted the way in which her music has been embraced by largely white audiences. I think a lot of major hip-hop artists, or at least hip-hop artists on a certain level, where they develop a reputation for being really forthright and animated about specific socio-political and culturally Black issues, that through the machinations of online music culture, the music ends up marketed in a certain way where it gets talked about most audibly and most loudly by white audiences. And Noname has been one of a number of artists, but certainly one of the most vocal in calling this out and expressing her frustration with this. And so Noname's new record, Sundial, is more than anything she's released before, I think, very vociferously for her Black audience. And so there's only so much I feel like I can really say about it, because a lot of how I feel about it is it doesn't matter, in the same way that it would with other artists. But, you're here listening to us because you want to hear our opinions. So I'll say what I think, but just with that in mind, that this isn't music for me. And the artist has made it very clear that it is music for a specific audience that they relate to and that they are a part of. And so a lot of the controversy around this has been Noname's inclusion of a verse from very infamous, but once upon a time, he was going to be the future of a very particular strand of hip hop, Jay Electronica, who's on this record on a song called Balloons, which, and as particular, his verse has drawn a lot of ire. In fact, it drew ire before the song was even released because of his very virulent anti-Semitism. It's pretty shameless what Jay Electronica says, and it's drawn him a lot of ire. And you can look into the socio-cultural history of attitudes from the Black community towards the Jewish community, particularly because Jay Electronica is a member of the Nation of Islam as well, and there's a contentious relationship between Arabic people and the Jewish people as well. It goes back to the Israel-Palestine conflict. There's a lot of geopolitical and sociocultural stuff going on there that I'm not entitled enough to comment on. But it was, for better or worse, this verse and the reaction to it and all that kind of stuff has just dominated the conversation around this album, particularly as well, Noname's insistence on not apologizing for it. And for just saying, look, I invited Jay on my record because I wanted Jay to be on my record, and I wanted Jay to express whatever Jay wanted to express. And for her, Jay's expression is one among many different points of view or perspectives from Black cultural figures on civil rights and cultural issues as it relates to the Black experience. And that's where she stands. So you can make up your own mind how you feel about that. It has to be acknowledged because it is just a part of the story of this album. But I want to just kind of put it to the side here because it's too much of a contentious ball of energy that I don't want it to kind of subsume my other thoughts on the record. Even though what Jay does and what Jay says is inextricably a part of the identity of the album and of many of its themes. Not the anti-Semitism itself, but where that comes from and Jay's particular perspective and experience. Noname has been on the record calling out the hypocrisy and the things that she finds dissatisfying about certain major Black cultural figures and the way they've expressed certain things and then maybe behaved in a certain way which has maybe been counter to that. I mean, on this record itself, on the song Namesake, which I think is one of the strongest songs on the record, she outright calls out, like Jay-Z, Beyonce, Kendrick, people who have, professed to be for civil rights, but have, taken checks from organizations and from people and, from places that stand, as Noname says it, in contradiction with what they purport to stand for. And so Noname is incredibly opinionated and unfiltered about how she feels about our relationships with these sorts of figures and culture. And so that informs a lot of what the record is. I think the record's really good. I think the record has some issues that come mainly from how myopic and, I guess, inside itself it can get at certain moments. The most pointed things that Noname does on this record, on songs like Namesake, are so strong and so in keeping with the kind of things that we come to expect from her, that other moments on the record that feel a little bit more incidental, again, certainly not for me and certainly not for this audience, don't land in the same way. But like, I think it's a really good record. It's just a record that is so fraught and consumed by these contentious aspects that Noname has kind of leaned into and, in many ways foregrounded as a part of a wider point that she's trying to make, that it's kind of difficult to approach it, engage with it, and listen to it in any other way or divorced from those things. And maybe that's Noname's point with it. But ultimately, I feel like the issue of Sundial, or the limitation of Sundial, is that it's maybe more successful as a conversation starter, or as a way of kind of Noname basically throwing some difficult thoughts at you or some complicated issues at you, and basically getting you to think about those things, getting you to kind of confront those things, more than it is an album of music that puts those ideas into you while you're, covertly, while you're just enjoying, what is essentially a really lovely and warm and funky and jazzy hip hop album. It's more of a polemic, which is fitting for where Noname is at, but also in and of itself kind of hard to treat as an album.
This album is actively pushing away at all of the potentially self-interrogatory things that could be a lot more interesting about it. Like, I don't deny the possibility that Noname is making a greater point maybe about including that J Electronica verse on the album, where she does directly touch on her own hypocrisy, or the hypocrisy of turning life experiences into art and then commodifying it. Like, these are things that she directly talks about and addresses, and that kind of works, like, in theory, but in execution.
I should also mention as well, I forgot to mention this when I talked about Namesake, that in that part of the song where she's kind of shouting out Rihanna, Beyonce, and Kendrick for hypocrisy, she immediately follows that out by calling herself out for hypocrisy for playing Coachella, after complaining about, whitewashing and, corruption and all that kind of thing. So she's very, she takes great pains to kind of put herself in front of the firing line across this record. That's worth acknowledging.
Yes, and I completely agree. And that's what makes it frustrating, is that she does that. And my response to it is not like that, though, because she's putting herself in the line of fire in terms of issues that are completely unrelated to the reasons why interrogating this is a fucking nightmare. And I'm not going to I'm going to be what we do on this channel is that we, before anything else, we be honest. I'm going to be honest with you. The way that she responded to this absolutely informed how I feel about the album, and I can't separate that at all because it pissed me off. And that when I was listening to the album, it was gnawing at the back of my my brain the whole time, and it made this almost impossible to think about, because it just again, it's what you said, it's myopic. It's so wrapped up in itself that you just end up in this fucking nexus, this Mobius strip of should I, shouldn't I? And then you're just, at the end of the day, you're like, oh yeah, this is also a really tastefully put together, smooth, kind of summery sounding R&B inflected hip hop album that's very thoughtful, very confidently delivered, very again, a lot of what I value in hip hop right now, Noname embodies almost flawlessly. And I mean, I enjoy her previous work too. I think Telephone is great, but I struggle intensely with her attempt here to foreground some issues and background other issues that make the album frustrating, not because it's difficult to reckon with, but because it's actively shooting itself in the foot and making it less interesting. It's very, very, very frustrating. And then I have that in the background of the sort of the concept of I get the idea of wanting to put your favorite rapper as like a feature on your album. Like I get that. And I don't really understand the way that the economy of the feature works nowadays, because like I don't know how much of that art form is collaborative. I've never known. I don't know if it is completely single-minded. I don't know if there are guidelines given. And I don't know what the etiquette is if you want someone to change something about their feature, or if that's even something you can do. All of that stuff is stuff that I don't know about, and I'm not going to claim to know about. So maybe she requested a feature, he gave her one, and that's all that there is to it. I don't want to speculate as to Noname's beliefs, because she's very outspoken about what she believes, even though it feels like a lot of it is a little bit contradictory in light of certain events. But that said, I want to like this album because it has many admirable qualities. It's just that it really does kind of feel like the writing is so like it's Charlie Kaufman levels of folding in on itself, but like from a cultural perspective that's way less, again, like an interesting thing about the way everyone's reacted to this is in contrast to how I think the Kendrick album last year was received, because he did a lot of similar shit that she does on this album in theory and did get flack, but I still think, broadly speaking, was a bit more warmly received just because his intentions were a bit more clear. With this album, it feels like I don't know what Noname attempts to accomplish, and that is what frustrates me.
I think I have an understanding of what she's trying to accomplish. And again, there's a lot that I admire about this record, and there's a lot that I think is really interesting about this record, and there's a lot that I think is valuable about what the record is doing. It's just hard to separate those things. Well, first of all, I mean, in the case of the J Electronica thing, I mean, it's hard to separate the value that I think comes from us, or culture more broadly, having these necessary conversations about this, deeply rooted and, difficult and ugly strand of anti-Semitism that exists within a particular cultural framework that hasn't just come out of nowhere, and that isn't going to just go away. And that isn't just one person's thing, J Electronica's beliefs, represent those of a lot of people, who come from his particular background, and, in the Nation of Islam and all that kind of thing, as well as the more deeply culturally ingrained stuff that, again, we're not really qualified enough to talk about. So I value that Noname is kind of foregrounding all of these conflicts that exist, in the way that we appreciate and commodify and categorize and assign value to art and particular artistic expressions and particular cultural expressions, and how we look at certain artists and the way in which they're treated by their fan bases, by various different types of audiences, essentially, despite just being creators trying to express themselves and trying to find a voice that they want ideally to connect to people that they relate to. And so even in the more mundane elements of this album, where Noname describes, where Noname goes into kind of her thoughts on aesthetic hypocrisies and in the beauty industry, and her domestic issues and her relationships and all kinds of things like that, I think the record ends really, really strongly as well. I mean, I think a song like Gospel is really, really fiery and has great features from both Silk Money and Billy Woods as well, that feel like the album kind of gets really electrified. I really love that. I'm not surprised to hear the Fugees as the FBI line from Silk Money. That's just such a great way of opening his verse. There's a lot of potential with this record to kind of start and maybe have some really necessary and difficult conversations about, not just about, anti-Semitism or cultural relations or whatsoever, but also just the relationship between the artist and the audience as well, that Noname seems to have wrestled with so much throughout her creative career, feeling as though she's categorized and held up and put in a certain light by a culture and by an audience that she doesn't relate to. And so that's an interesting aspect of the record's existence, but it's also really hard to listen to an album that has that verse from Jay Electronica on it. And the other thing that's really irritating is that apart from that Jay Electronica verse, that song is great. Like, I really like Noname's verse on that song.
She's got a good verse.
She goes the fuck off on that song.
Something that people aren't talking about is that not just that Jay Electronica's verse is anti-Semitic, they also don't bring up the fact that Jay Electronica's verse is bad. Like, it's lopsided, it's awkward, it's clunky, it comes the fuck out of nowhere. He forces rhymes all over the place. Like, it's a bad verse. Like people are like pretending like that the anti-Semitism, like a lot of defenses of this album. And look, I like this album more than I don't. And I understand the frustration people have with liking a lot of it and finding the conversation like difficult when people hone in on this one specific part of it. But my problem is that this is not just a problem that's localized in this one place about this one thing. It is representative of a much more complicated web of things that are connected on this album that would make me just as like conflicted about its kind of chimeric identity. And I think you're right, Riley, that is what she's probably trying to do on here. But the album to me is always at its best when she is more internal and talking about like, hey, I'm a lot of this album really is her being like, hey, I'm a confident Black woman and I have a lot of like, there's a lot of issues in my life, but I'm in a really like solid foundational place right now. And that's reflected in the sound, that's reflected in the confidence and the delivery, in the production. And I find all of that really interesting. And it feels like there's these way bigger, thornier macro questions that she's asking, and she like is filing them away. She's like putting them over here and then like foregrounding all this other stuff here. And it's like, this album needs to pick a fucking lane.
Let us know at home what you think of this new Noname album, of the controversy surrounding it, of the difficult things that it brings up, and what you think of Noname's intentions, whether you think intentions even matter, whether it's inexcusable. Regardless, whatever your perspective is, let us know as well. I want to kind of get a little bit more of a diversity and perspective on this thing than just us pasty old white people. Thank you for watching though. And if you want to go above and beyond and support us directly, for just $1 a month, you can become a member of the Jams D family, get your name in the title crawl of every video on this channel. Plus, if you want to recommend us some music to us to do, your recommendation will go to the top of the pile. Until next time, though, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago. Levi's, quality never goes out of style.